So, Lost Daughters had a little bit of a stranger history than most of my books. It was actually, as approached by a publisher via my agent, looking for sort of rich historical fantasy. They knew that was something I did. So I wrote up, I'd been in the Philippines fairly recently at the time, and that very much influenced what I wrote. So it was a story set at the edge of a sort of colonial empire, and driven by magic, and the magic goes away. And it's the Philippines is an odd place in that the way it fits geographically, it is enormously valuable for trade, but it's impossible to defend. So the history is sort of like waiting for one empire after another to conquer them. And I wanted to kind of capture that feeling of, okay, this empire is about to collapse, we're about to get conquered. And at the time, my wife had been watching a lot of Ion television, and they were running sort of heavy rotations of Without a Trace and Ghost Whisperer. So it just sort of leached into what I was writing, and I ended up writing this story which involved someone whose job was to find kidnapped ghosts and kind of merge the two of them. So I sent 100 pages of it off to the publisher, and they loved the world. They didn't like the story so much, so they wanted a new story set in that world. And in the course of writing it, I had some images of, that didn't quite fit in the story, and I knew fit in how did the magic go away, what was going on. And I had two things that stuck with me that became the core of the Lost Daughters. One was a girl who wakes up covered in blood on the throne, like in the arms of the dead Empress. And I didn't know how she got there or who she was yet, but I knew I had that image very strongly in my mind. There's also I had a long conversation at the time, fairly recently, with a good friend of mine who spent a lot of time in the military, and had to do a lot of very dark things, all of which were his duty, but felt like he had to leave the military when he discovered how much he liked killing people. He didn't really want that to be his identity. It really bothered him. And I wondered how that would work, how that kind of PTSD would work in a fantasy world which is very militarized, which doesn't even have a word for PTSD, how they would treat it. So I knew the second character was, not based on my friend, but was this soldier who had to leave the battlefield, and that the solution, the Emperor, he's a great soldier, and that the Empress's solution to his PTSD was basically to take away his memories and stash him in the palace in case she needed him. It wasn't until I started writing that I realized at this moment, and I'm not giving away anything in the book because this is on the back cover of the book, so the moment when the magic is taken away, the royal family dies, he knows that the Empress is dead because his memories start to come back, and he suddenly realizes he has a wife and daughter who he's forgotten for 10 years. The whole world's falling apart. I know, by the way, you have a family out there somewhere who you didn't know about for the last 10 years. So that was what got me started writing this, and I needed to explore their stories, find out about them. Between the time I was asked to do that and got the new piece ready for treatment, the editor who had asked for it retired, so I then had a longer than expected journey to find a home before it came out, and eventually came out last month. So I'm going to read a bit from chapter 2. It has both of the protagonists in it. At the time when the magic collapses, Sperrin, the soldier, is in his 40s. Ketya, the girl who I mentioned, covered in blood, is 19. This chapter starts about 11 years earlier, so she's about 8 years old in it. He's in his early 30s, sort of a famous soldier on his way to becoming more famous, and just finding out just starting to come to terms with his PTSD. So this first section is from Sperrin's point of view. Mud Otter Crossing, 11 years before the loss. "This is going to be a God-sucking fiasco," Nemesis said to me under his breath. They're referencing a line from the prologue. That had become something of a catchphrase for Bales, and very nearly managed to be her last words. Her actual last words had been the more soldierly, "Don't let the beer go to waste." Of course, we told her husband, a scholar and poet who'd become famous for a book of children's verses he'd written before it became apparent that the Empress wasn't about to let a company commander with a reputation for coolness under pressure leave the service to raise children, that his name had been the last thing that she'd said. A channeler or a bureaucrat could raise children and continue to do the job the Empress had assigned with the help of nurses. For a field soldier, that simply wasn't possible. Which is why I saw so little of my own daughter, whom I practically had to become reacquainted with every time I took leave. Bales had been a soldier for 40 years, since she'd been a teenager, but Nemesis and I were practically the only soldiers at her funeral. If Bales had died fighting at the head of her company, her soldiers would have been given a few days to mourn, rotated off the line, and allowed to hold a burial ceremony. But she had died after a long sickness, eventually sent home to convalesce when the cough she acquired at Davenin set into her lungs. Rotating a company off the line for a few days was at worst a minor inconvenience for the new Governor General. Giving a company 2 weeks' leave and allotting transportation to a funeral was unthinkable to the governor who had browbeaten an army to victory at Davenin, and who personally oversaw the army's logistics with complex schedules of his own devising. The army ate better and traveled faster than it ever had, but leaves no longer occurred outside of precise timetables, and commanders who used more supplies or took more casualties than the schedules provided for found themselves swiftly transferred elsewhere. For Nemesis and I, promotion in the wake of that campaign had removed us from the governor's command and sent us to other fights, only the one at Kelpie Aqueduct together. That's the scene right before this one. But our work together in bleak causes had led to a new posting. After the funeral, we would be serving a different governor and his appointed captain general by taking joint tactical command of an expedition along the Powder River, where we were expected to clear defensive emplacements along both banks of the river to allow troop transport safe passage. Command of the expedition had been declined by a number of more senior officers as operationally hopeless. Even the captain general in nominal charge of the expedition had chosen to remain behind with the rear guard at the fortified river port where we would begin the expedition. The better to ensure our supply lines, he explained, but also the better to avoid blame for the expedition's failure. It had been ordered by the Empress against the advice of her senior military advisors. It would be carried out. Having found 2 successful over-captains willing to take the tactical command and the responsibility for the expedition, the Captain General was more than willing to grant us leave to attend an old comrade's funeral while he massed supplies and troops at the depot. We spent the trip poring over maps and supply lists and gaming out tactics, along with the pair of sub-lieutenants who'd been dispatched as aides. We'd given them the morning off. They would attend enough interment ceremonies for friends over the next few months without asking them to mourn a captain they'd never served with. That was how we'd gotten to the funeral. Now a part of me was wondering why. Military funerals tended to be short and to the point. An officer spoke about the service the soldier had rendered for the Empire and the Army, recited the soldier's service record, or at least the interesting parts of it, and comrades might share some memories. Then the body was interred while a band played the dead trooper's march, which had another name that no one ever used, and perhaps a few favorite songs of the deceased, then closed by playing the company and regimental themes. Then everyone retired to a mess tent or restaurant, depending on where the funeral took place, got gloriously drunk, sang a bit more, and told exaggerated stories about the dead soldier. At this funeral, no one but Nemesis and I even wore blades. People recited poetry, and most of them barely seemed to have known Bales, unless she had a very different sense of humor on leave than she did with the Army. Mostly people comforted the husband, who I gathered had written or translated most of the poems people were reading. Bales had loved poetry, so it wasn't totally inappropriate, but the ceremony was a lot more reflective and a lot less celebratory than I expected, with a lot less drinking. I never had much of an ear for poetry and couldn't really tell a good poem from a bad one, something Bales had mocked me endlessly about. I suppose these were good ones, but the only ones that really stuck with me were a series of translations and modern renderings from old verses. Toward the end, a young man with a beautiful baritone voice sang a haunting version of Keir's Lament. The traditional version, which I'd read in school but never cared for, mostly focused on the politics of the Holy War's end and on social mores that no longer existed. The husband's adaptation cut to the heart of the story. General Kier's stunning victory in battle, tempered by the loss of his sons and the disappearance of his wife Jula, herself a major figure in the war. His search for the missing Jula, hampered by enemies and allies alike who didn't want wounds reopened that the treaty negotiations had barely papered over, and his embittered marginalization at the very moment that a triumphant empire celebrated his exploits and made his name synonymous with victory. While the young man sang, I understood for a moment Bales's love for poetry and the clarity it could bring to emotions that otherwise defied description. But then the next speaker started reciting something about children bathing that I'm sure was a metaphor for something in this curious world outside the army that I visited sometimes but didn't live in. By the end of it, Nemeus and I were sitting in the back row, heads bowed to look respectful, while we planned out skirmish tactics for the river campaign. This next scene is from Ketya's point of view. I was 8 years old when I first realized my mother was sick. By then, she must have been pretty far along, but she lived another year. It was one of those diseases that preys on channelers, one of the side effects of magic if you're really unlucky. It affected a lot of channelers who had served at Davenin, and even though she'd only been there a little while, she caught it too. Her lungs gradually solidified, and it was harder and harder for her to breathe, but I didn't know any of that at the time. I just knew that my mother had less energy, and walking from one room to another would wear her out. Until I realized there was something really wrong. It was sort of a golden age for me. I had never been so happy. My mother had always been so busy with her duties for the Empress that my moments with her were precious and fleeting. Now we spent hours together. I would sit cross-legged next to her on her giant bed, pink satin coverlets swirling all around us, and she would help me with my reading and history. She would tell me long stories when I asked her questions. Now I can see that she was trying to teach me all she could in the time she had left, but at the time I just felt glad for the attention. For a while my father was around a lot too. Then he was gone all the time, and more easily provoked when he was home. I had never seen my father lose control before, but when he was in the room with my mother, sometimes he would forget I was there and cry. Usually he would send me to the nursery, unless my mother asked me to stay. Then he was away for a long time, and by the time he got back, my mother had faded badly. She could barely shuffle across the room with me helping, and she gasped for breath at every step. I had finally realized that she was really sick, that it wasn't something that was going to get better. I still had no idea that she could die from it, and nobody told me that. She just spent all the time with me that she could. When my father came back, he took me for a long walk and explained, sort of, how he had spoken with a god, he didn't say which one, even when I asked, and traded my name for my mother's healing. I remembered what my mother had told me about gods wanting human names, so it made sense to me. The part about trickery hadn't really registered. It was a very good thing that I had done, my father told me, even though I hadn't done anything. Everything would be all right now, he said. I would have a new name when my mother healed. Then she didn't heal. She didn't fade any faster. But by then she was close to the end. Finally, she couldn't breathe at all, and her own lungs drowned her. There were no more walks with my father, no more gentle explanations. When he gave me my mother's name after her death, he told me it was to honor her memory, but I knew better. He gave me my mother's name to punish me for failing to save her. I don't know how he adjusted all the records, or if he even had to. Ananya's history was riddled with people who had lost or changed names, so the channelers who administered the records surely had ways to deal with it. If anyone knew anything about my name changing, they never said it to me. I know I didn't literally kill my mother. She spent so much time with me that year, and I was so happy. I wonder if she had any time left for herself or for my father. When the god accepted my name as a sacrifice and then failed to heal my mother, I think it broke my father's heart. He had to face my mother's death for the first time. He'd already had to face not being able to save her himself. When my name wasn't enough to save her either, part of him just withdrew from us. He focused on saving the empire because he couldn't save her. My father had learned how to speak with gods, but that still wasn't enough to save the person he loved most in the world. What chance did I have? I didn't have my mother's gifts or my father's wisdom. Why would the gods think my name was worth my mother's life? It wasn't, of course. If I'd been a prodigy or had more of my mother's raw channeling talent, my name might have been enough. I was only 9 years old. What else did he have to trade? They kept the name, but it wasn't enough. If I'd been a little more talented, I might have saved her. I might have saved our family. Up until that point, I think my father had high hopes for me. But when the god didn't give him back my mother in return for my name, he must have decided that I didn't have the potential to become as talented as he and my mother were. I tried to earn back his trust, but what could I do? Every time he looked at me, it must have reminded him that my name wasn't worth enough to redeem the life of the woman he loved. Back in Sperrin's point of view now. At the end of a successful fighting season, the Captain General sent Nemesius and me on long leaves, while he took on the logistics of staging supplies and reinforcements for the following spring when the offensive resumed. I think he was concerned that all the fighting I'd done over the last 17 years would eventually impact my effectiveness as a commander. He was more right than he knew, although before that winter the possibility had never occurred to me. I enjoyed what I did. As someone who had become one of the Empress's favorite officers, I had the freedom to plan and execute battles as I saw fit. I had the freedom to participate in those battles on a personal level as well. I killed a lot of enemy soldiers, directly and indirectly. Not until that winter did it occur to me that just how much I had come to enjoy killing might become a problem. I had never had any problem differentiating between the time I spent soldiering and the other parts of my life. Somehow that winter, the barriers that separated the different parts of my identity began to break down. At first, the leave went normally. Visits to the families of fallen soldiers, a special party for my daughter to celebrate all the holidays I had missed spending with her, a formal dinner with my wife and her sister and several other prominent channelers. Our marriage hadn't been especially close for a while. Both of us had so immersed ourselves in our careers that we seldom exchanged messages while I was at the front, beyond a few lines that I would enclose with the letters and packages I sent to our daughter. But it had been comfortable enough, like any Ananyan marriage. Now, however, I sensed a greater distance between us, and wondered if years of fighting had begun to change me. It felt as if my wife had been replaced by one of the Fae from the Kelpie aqueduct. As if my wife, the woman I loved with all my heart despite our differences, had been disconnected from my life and an alien creature left behind. A day later, when the idea of killing her entered my mind as if from nowhere, I knew something had changed. Later, when I found out the secrets she kept from me, it would have been easy to blame Sepha for the urge to murder me, barely restrained. But that wasn't it. Her secrets may have increased the emotional distance between us, but the feelings that threatened to overwhelm me came from too many years on the battlefield, not from any choices my wife made. She hadn't changed, I had. I could return home, but I could no longer leave the battlefield behind. We were out walking in an indoor winter market, my daughter skipping beside me and holding my hand, while Sepha walked ahead to browse stalls that didn't interest Linnea. Something felt off. I found myself looking at Sepha the way I looked at an enemy soldier I was stalking, my mind providing kill moves each time she took a step. The other people in the market felt like alien strangers, not targets, but not potential friends either. Only Linnea, skipping beside me, happy to finally have me home, seemed normal to me. I loved my daughter as much as ever. So why did I suddenly feel the urge to kill her mother? More horrifying, was this an urge I might give into in an unguarded moment? So far it felt abstract, something I could do, not something I had to do. But why was I feeling it at all? That evening, after I put Linnea to bed, Sepha and I found ourselves alone together in our bedroom. The room looked like it had barely been slept in during the months I'd been gone. I knew Sepha often stayed with her sister or other friends during our long separations. Tonight she seemed friendlier though, as if she sensed that the distance between us had grown too wide, and we needed to find a way to come closer together. We talked a little, mostly about shopping and about our daughter. Even when we had felt closer, the first days together after months of living separate lives felt disconnected. But tonight I found myself reluctant to ease the disconnectedness. Eventually, drowsiness began to catch up with us. We lay together in the center of the big bed, not quite asleep, but not talking anymore. I couldn't shut my mind off. Every time Cepha shifted, I automatically thought of the easiest move to kill her, as if I slept next to an enemy rather than the person who loved me and whom I loved, the person whom I couldn't help loving ever since my first magical introduction to her. Why did my mind want to view her as an enemy? Drowsily, Cepha snuggled back against me. "Make love to me," she said. Same perspective, but time has passed. I slipped into the headquarters tent so silently that nobody noticed me at first. Then Nemesis looked up sharply. "Sperrin, you're hurt." "No, I'm fine. I needed a long walk." "You're covered in blood," he said. I lifted the baldric over my shoulder and hung my blade from one of the pegs on a freestanding rack. Then I stripped off my sodden shirt and hung it from another hook, careful not to let the bloody cloth touch the blade. An aide stepped forward with a towel and a bowl of warm water. I scrubbed off my chest and arms, soaking my face for a long moment in the warmth of the wet towel before looking up at Nemesis. "What happened out there tonight?" he asked me. The aide had vanished to find me something to eat and give us some privacy. I shrugged. There are 14 Alliance troopers, and they're covering Channeler in a forward ambush post who won't be troubling us when we advance tomorrow. I left the post in the possession of some troopers from the Silver Coast Sharks. Nemesis looked concerned. "Again? This is the third time this week you've gone off like that. And each time it's made things a little easier for our troopers. What's the problem?" He seemed to pick his words carefully. "Sperrin, you know I love you like a brother. And we've fought together for years. I love nothing better than fighting beside you." He trailed off. But you're the co-commander of this expedition and our battle planner. What if you died out there? Then what would we do?" "But I didn't die." He sighed. "Sperrin, I think you're a little out of control." I snorted. "This is how I find control." Nemesis shook his head. "Most people go on leave to recover themselves from what we do in battle, but you just came back from leave." "I'm fine," I said. "I'll be fine. I have a campaign to win." "You can't win it all by yourself, Sperrin." That sort of missed the point, although I couldn't say so to Nemesis. The almost daily fighting along the Powder River was only part of the campaign I was fighting. I saw my wife in the face of every Alliance soldier I killed. Sometimes I had started to see friends and neighbors as well, but always my wife, the woman I loved more than anyone other than my daughter. I could win the fights in the Powder River campaign, but sooner or later we would win the last battle, and then I would be sent on leave again, and then what would I do? It took some time for me to admit Nemesis was right. I couldn't sustain the path I was on, despite my efforts to burn the awful desire out of me by killing soldiers who really were enemies. Some days for a few hours I could lose myself in the joy of fighting and winning against a strong foe, but always my thoughts would circle back to the inevitable end of the campaign and where it would lead. To my wife and all the others I cared about, who I was becoming a danger to. That didn't mean I would do anything to slow our victory. I wouldn't let myself or any of the soldiers under my command lose focus as we forced a retreat, beat back a counterattack, and now faced what most of the Army saw as the climactic battle of the campaign. For me, the climax had been months ago, when the Alliance commander first fell into the trap Nemesis and I had set up, a trap that would draw shut tomorrow. But if that had been apparent to anyone else, the Alliance would never have fallen into it. At the time, and for weeks afterward, they thought they had taken the initiative in the campaign. I hoped I would still be able to savor the victory. In the meantime, I needed to find a solution to the problem tearing me apart. Or I had to follow through on the solution I'd already decided on, however painful it might prove. I waited until every detail of tomorrow's battle had been set into place. I wouldn't be fighting hand to hand unless the trap failed, unless a lot of things failed, actually. In this battle, troops and terrain would be holding the Alliance army in place while our channelers hit them. Among other things, my activities since returning from leave had exacerbated a shortage of channelers in the Alliance army we faced. Unless all of the scouts I had sent misread the situation, it would be difficult for the Alliance to counter the trap that was about to close on them. The last troops posted in position, I walked off the wall I'd marked as observation post for Nemesis and me tomorrow, and strode toward the channeler's quarters to see Kemi. As senior channeler for my regiment, Kemi enjoyed private quarters, one of the few privileges of her position that she took advantage of. I had known her since I'd been a junior sub-captain in one of my first postings. Kemi's husband commanded the regiment. Such pairings were uncommon, but not unknown. As the newest sub-captain with the regiment, I commanded the detail assigned to protect the engineers and channelers. Not a safe post exactly, since every enemy attack targeted the channelers if at all possible, but a relatively easy one for an officer whose capabilities remained unknown to his over-captain. Plus, I'd been assigned to the regiment because of the death of the previous sub-captain holding that job. This was at the Battle of Perilyn Fields, just before the big Alliance counterattack. Our regiment broke through the enemy's front in that first mad assault, and then the salient collapsed around us as the Alliance poured in reinforcements. We had to abandon the war engines and fall back fast, with Kemi's husband and what had been the vanguard of the regiment the only thing protecting our rear. In the end, it came down to hand-to-hand fighting, with me and a handful of troopers holding a swarm of attackers off us, and Kemi protecting us from magical lightning bursts boiling down from the sky. We held until the Alliance attack lost its fury, and finally until we were relieved. 3 days later, we received her husband's body back in an exchange of prisoners and remains. Kemi never remarried. Sometimes people did, but it seemed to be less important to the Empress than arranging first marriages. And Kemi didn't seem to be inclined to push the process. She answered the door in trousers and an undertunic, comfortable clothes for around camp. "Good evening, Captain. I was just having dinner in my quarters. Would you care to join me?" "Thank you, I'd be happy to." We shared meals sometimes. Her husband had saved us both, and we'd saved each other's lives more than once, so we felt a certain connectedness, even in the years we'd spent in separate regiments. I'd been glad to have her serving with me this campaign. There were more powerful channelers in the army, and my wife was a much more powerful channeler. But Kemi knew soldiers and engineers and how to work with them. She never created friction, and with her as senior channeler, no one else did either. After a few pleasantries, we ate in silence while she waited for me to tell her what I'd come for. Kemi had a stocky soldier's frame, unlike most channelers, who tended to have a more willowy look. She wore her blonde hair cropped short. "I need to ask advice in confidence," I finally said. She nodded, and I already trusted her. "After the battle tomorrow, I think I need to ask for a transfer away from the front. I think I need you to ask the Empress for me." That didn't seem to be the question Kemi expected, but she didn't look shocked either. She asked a few questions, and I found myself describing what had happened and my growing inability to separate loved ones from targets. "It happens sometimes," she said. "You've been at the front a long time. You may need a longer rest than a leave can give you." "That's what I think," I answered. "If I can take time away from it, my mind will stop playing these games. Things can be better with Sepha again." I think that was more hopefulness than what I actually felt. But at the time, it never occurred to me that Sepha and Linian and I wouldn't be together if I could work out the problem. For all my battlefield tactical skill, it never occurred to me that there might be deeper problems I couldn't see. I think it may have occurred to Kemi, but she didn't say so, at least not directly. "The Empress values your service very much," Kemi said instead. "I think she will be very reluctant to let you go. I'm not sure how much my service will be worth if I can't solve this. It's hard to give my best when I'm afraid of what I'll do when I go home." She nodded. "True." Something seemed to occur to her. "Why not talk to Nolene? She has the Empress's ear, much more than I do." "What would I tell her? I want to kill your sister. Soon I may want to kill you too. How do you think that will go?" "Also true. I will do what I can." I could tell she had something else she wanted to say, so I waited. I once felt the same way. When my husband died after Perilyn Fields, I felt very angry for a long time. She waved away my response. "I know I didn't show it, but for a long time I killed people for my husband's sake. Like you, I saw his face instead of the people I killed. I didn't want to kill him, but I wanted to kill for him. And like you, I didn't like what it did to me after a while." "What did you do?" She shrugged. "It passed. Your problem is deeper than mine was, I think. Perhaps you should focus more on the people you kill, their names, their faces. Kill who you need to, but don't give them your wife's face." I nodded. "Will that help?" "Not really. It will make it easier for you to keep going until the Empress responds to your request, though. These things don't always happen quickly. I don't have Nolene's influence, but I will make the case for a transfer away from combat. Just for a little while." until things settled down with Safa. If they settled down, I knew. But I couldn't say that. Kemi knew, though. I will do my best, she said again. Try to be patient. I've been trying, I said. I've been trying to get through it in other ways, but it's not working. And now I feel like I'm out of time. We're going to win this battle tomorrow, and if we win it well, the Alliance army we're facing will be destroyed. And after that, in a few months at most, they're going to send me home on leave again. I'm just not sure I can handle it. For a little while you can, Kemi said, but her eyes were sad. This last scene's from Ketya's point of view. It wasn't quite true that I didn't see my father at all between the speech he made at my mother's funeral and his ascension to Chancellor of Ananya, but mostly I saw him at a distance. He'd always worked intensely, and now he threw himself into his role as provincial governor even more intensely, as a poor consolation for the wife he had lost, and the daughter who had been unequal to the task of returning her to life. I think it was too painful for him to even look at me sometimes. He would stay at work until long after my bedtime. In the morning, he would already be at work when I breakfasted. The nurses would give me pitying looks and tell me that he had looked in on me while I slept, and that they could see in my father's eyes how much he loved me. By then, the nurses and other servants felt almost like family to me. My parents had maintained a very formal household, but with my father gone most of the time, things relaxed a lot. Many of the servants had kids around my age, and I was allowed to play with them as long as all my lessons and all their work was done. It also meant that I got to run around town with them and meet some of their friends. I hadn't really been out of the house much since my mother had gotten sick. Not that anyone was trying to hide me away, but at the time I was too young to go out without someone supervising me, and no one was willing to suggest it with my mother sick. So it felt great to actually have a chance to play outside with other kids again, instead of spending all my time in the nursery with the same toys I'd had since I was 8, or in the library with my tutors. My father did tell me about his promotion to Chancellor firsthand, though. He'd been summoned to the capital immediately, but took the time to stop by the house and order lunch set for both of us. He even asked the cooks to serve my favorite foods. It was funny. We'd seen each other so little since my mother died that he didn't know what I liked to eat anymore, but he knew that the cooks would. So we sat, just the two of us, at the huge dining table, and I nibbled on all of my favorite things. There was too much to do more than nibble, while he spun stories about how wonderful things in the capital would be, and how much I could learn there, and how I would be meeting the Empress herself. I can't wait to tell my friends, I said. Somehow it didn't occur to me that I wasn't going to see them again. You will need to pack, my father said, unusually patient. The nurses will need help closing up the household and packing the things that will be going onto the city. I will be leaving tonight, and you will be following as soon as our things are packed. You will be traveling with our things. Someone from the palace will be coming to escort you. Why do we need an escort? I'm sure the nurses can get me there. I'm not a baby anymore. Of course not. That is why the nurses will not be coming with you. The household staff has been reassigned by the Empress at my request. They will be leaving as soon as the house is packed. The new governor who replaces me will want his own staff, and we will have new servants at the palace in the drowned city. The implications of all these changes were too big to take in. I ventured a question. What about my friends? Will I see them again? Tears welled in my eyes, and my father must have noticed them. Don't cry, he said. This is a time to celebrate, not to cry. I know that you think this move will be painful, but the people you are leaving behind are servants. You don't have any real friends, so it won't hurt to move the way you think. At the palace there will be more appropriate friends, and your life will be better. That didn't make me any less sad, but I knew my father would be happier if I held back my tears, so I did. I didn't want the last thing he saw as he walked out of the house to take on his new responsibilities, to be the crying daughter he left behind him. You will recognize the sickness that killed her mother in the book.
Do you have the books here?
Oh yeah.
Because it was not available on Amazon.
What?
It was available only on Kindle.
Okay. Yeah. I think that was before you could order the book then. Now it's available.
No, it's
so, yeah. But I have
you can get it.
Yeah. There's that.
I want to buy it.
Yeah. Oh, great.
You have to sign it.
Of course. But that chapter kind of gets at the gaslighting that's underlies the story.
Because those books are popular now. There is your competitor, George Martin, is a #1 book in the New York Times bookshop.
Yeah. Well, this isn't there yet.
It's getting there.
Yeah. No, it's every book I write is like my favorite book at the time. It's one of the things I love about writing is you're always, you're never at a point where you're like, okay, it's all downhill from here. It's like every book you can do things you couldn't do.
There are 16
before.
books.
Yeah.
Will it be a continuation? No.
I hope so. I am working on a sequel. This book is complete, but it's, it resolves the major issues of the book. But there's certainly more I want to say about these characters. So.
But why about the daughters? Why not the boys? There is all this more action with the sons. They compete. No.
A lot of it's about, and some of it was, seeing things through, my eyes as a father then. But there's a certain amount of relief might not be the right word, when I realized that no matter what I do wrong, I can't possibly be as bad a father as some of the examples of father in this book.
There is always somebody else than you are.
But it's, there's certainly, it does revolve around a couple of daughters and a couple of father-daughter relationships. And Ketya, who has no trouble believing that a God would lie to her, but can't believe that her father would lie to her. And needs to kind of overcome that.
I always like our kids. They should get used to that.
He's a very charismatic guy, her father. He's a lot of people. One of the things that changed the book, there's a character partway through, and here I don't want to give away too much, but who I had intended to be a fairly minor character, and she was just so much fun to write that she grew into a much bigger role, and I had no idea if she was going to live or die, and neither did she. But it wound up changing the whole ending of the book. It just kind of rippled through. I ended up merging her with another character I'd planned on, because all of the other characters have this sort of awe of the Chancellor. They see him as this great figure, and she just sees him for, someone who's been this terrible person, terrible father, terrible. She's also, it's very much a dystopian novel, but none of the major characters see that, and she's, through her eyes, the first time they see it, because they just take this world for granted. They've been pretty privileged, and this is the way the world works. If the Empress the Empress decides on all the marriages. If she decides that, hey, you look great with this other person, she's going to make you fall in love with that person, and if you happen to be in a relationship with someone else right now, well, too bad. It's a terrible system, but well, of course, that's the way it works. The Empress arranges marriages. Kemi didn't get remarried because, the Empress is much more interested in, putting these young couples together, and, it's like she's playing dolls with people's lives. But
do you have to travel to locations, or just it's in your imagination?
As I was talking about before you got here, the underlying
I think
story.
we're supposed to be at 7 o'clock.
What? No, 6:30.
Oh, that's it.
Nice going.
Could have been here at 6:30, I just put maybe able to fit in 7 o'clock.
No. The original story that became this, it came out of a trip I'd made to the Philippines. And it was set at the edges of this empire. The publisher loved the world but didn't like that story, so then they wrote about, went back to the story about the magic going away and the disaster that causes. So that story's still in my mind. That was a fun piece to write. So there are definitely other things I want to write about these characters in this empire.
I see you're going to continue.
I hope to, yeah. There's another book that I'm working on a sequel to this. I'm working on another book at the same time. I have a feeling the other book's going to get written first, and then because it's really pushing its way into my head.
You're not getting contributed in the book?
I sort of use each one, I'll use one to procrastinate from the other. So they're very, very different. The one, the other one's science fiction. It's set in a future. I actually mentioned this to you, I think, where people change bodies very easily. And there have been plenty of things with people switching bodies, but it's almost always like this momentous decision, or it's like it costs what a car does. Yeah, but here, a new body might cost what an iPhone would cost. As a standard one.
It's not like body shifters, like vampires and all that.
Yeah, it's not that kind of. No, you're literally like shifting you're backing yourself up every night when you go to bed, and you might have a different body that you use for work and a different, versus the body that you have at home. And some people are very rich, might have better bodies, or if you get people who are workout fanatics, they can buy used sort of rundown bodies and get them into shape and flip them the way people flip houses now. And so if like a horse race is it's like not jockeys riding on horses, but actually people are in the actual horses, and they're using DNA from classic horses, and so
but you're not science fiction, you like fantasy.
I like both. I write more fantasy. I teach both. I like both. They do different things. But I had this idea that I just, it's like couldn't get out of my head, and I think I need to write it before I'll be able to finish this. So I'm doing them both at the same time, switching back and forth.
Then do you have to take time to take care of your daughter and work?
Well, so I'm writing slowly. She just finished her first play. It was,
That's exciting.
Yeah. It's been an exciting time. Her birthday's this weekend, so it's been, between that and Hanukkah, and it's she has a sort of whole month of celebration.
This weekend, that's because I have a friend that was born on Christmas Day, so she used to celebrate her birthday in February because she wanted to get gifts.
Yeah, really.
On Christmas and for her birthday, because combined gifts are not always working, but they're giving the cheaper gift here and cheaper gift there. So. Marie.
Oh, that's all I need to say.
Yeah, I'm hoping Kara grows up to be a little less transactional than that.
No, it comes later in life,
Yeah, true.
When you've been self-absorbed and.
Yeah, it was nice. I got to dedicate this book to her. So it was part of the. It's certainly not about her, but she was very young when I was writing most of it. But there's a lot I wouldn't have written had she not been in my life. Had I not been thinking about, there were things, because I was abused as a kid, and looking at that again through the eyes of being a father let me see a lot of characters in different ways.
What made you choose a wolf?
There's and the publisher really controls the cover. I'm very happy with this cover, but as a writer, your role in the cover process is usually complaining about it afterwards if the publisher screws it up. But there is a wolf that figures in the.
Okay, because I was going to say it draws you to.
Yeah. It is actually related to something in the book. It isn't one of those hey, this is a great image. It has nothing to do with the book. So I wanted, and I'd suggested certain images that they might pick from, and that was one of them. And the Drowned City was another. The city that had been basically wiped out in the war with the gods that had happened 800 years ago, which is now breaking out again. But it's they've just infested with sea monsters. It's it was almost underwater and things, and it was just defiant. We're going to keep this city because it's a symbol of all that. The symbol of fighting back against the gods.
Do you build anything on Greek mythology or influence?
Not really. There are a few. There's a griffin in there. There's some. There are fey creatures, and the gods are.
Because they had gods fighting humans and gods, and this combination.
Much more like the relationship that you'd see in Spencer's Fairy Queen, where the gods are effectively very powerful elves, and not in the Tolkien sense, but in the fairy queen sense, the fairy court kind of. So they're powerful and malicious fae, and they have this very antagonistic relationship with humans. There's been this war that was fought to a standstill. the magic that humans used is channeled through gods as part of this treaty, and apparently now it's coming apart and the gods are back, and the whole royal family was killed in this. So yeah, it was. So in that way, it's less on Greek mythology and more in some ways on Judaism, on that tradition of not a religion that depends on faith like Catholicism, but a religion where there's this long history of arguing with God and getting into fights with God and having a very antagonistic relationship where
everybody's going to lose in that with God.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. The Old Testament is pretty much the history of the Jewish people losing arguments with God. But that idea of this is not a relationship based on love or faith. This is a very contentious relationship that has ended in a truce that is now falling apart. That there are lots of gods out there that would be perfectly happy to kill all people.
Yeah.
Are there any, I know you said you write both sci-fi and fantasy.
Yeah.
Are there any authors in particular that have influenced you or that you draw inspiration from?
A lot, and it changes constantly, and there's so many good writers out there right now that I know I just picked up the new Rebecca Roundhorse book, which I haven't read yet, but I'm dying to read, and but there'll be, on this I was reading, and I teach science fiction, I read a lot of science fiction, I know a lot of writers, and we always kick around ideas, but I'll also read, I read a lot of history that just gets me into the framework I need to be in, getting my mindset in that. So it's not always a direct relationship. Once in a while there's something in another story, it's I wish I thought of that, or you build on an idea, and a lot of writing is reactive to that. So I'd say the idea of the bodies probably first started percolating at the back of my mind from a very different story that worked on some of the same themes 30 years ago, which was The Winter Market by William Gibson. There, it was the 80s, it was, we had a very different relationship with computers, and there the character who is, as far as he's concerned, is dead because she's now in this computer, but is still calling the protagonist and wants nothing to do with her, he sees her as dead. She's in this computer, which at the time, memory was super expensive. So there's this, you have to keep working or else they're just going to turn you off. You can't afford to pay for it. Bodies weren't cheap. But she had been disabled and drug addicted, and to her, she feels better than she's ever felt. She saw the body she was in as nothing but a liability, and she's happier than she's ever been. He sees it as, I went to your funeral, you're dead, and it's just that sort of thinking about different relationships with bodies. There's a wonderful scene in Anela Hopkinson's story, Habit of Waste, the story overall is fun, but there's this brilliant scene in the middle of it, at the beginning of it, where the protagonist has changed into a different body. And in this story, it's a very expensive process. It's just one of these once-in-a-lifetime investments. And her car breaks down, she has to take the bus to work, and she sees someone in her old body. And she's annoyed that that person seems happy in the body that she hated. So, it's this body was, she's it had to be someone who was a burn victim, or someone who couldn't afford a new body. She donated her old body to that when she. But she's, clearly she has other issues. It doesn't really matter, and which is what the story's about. Putting her getting in a new body isn't going to deal with any of her body issues. And it's a story about body issues, which isn't really what I'm writing about, except in very different ways. But kind of put, you think about different ways people relate to their bodies. So there are stories that definitely led to that. There are definitely particular things that related into the Lost Daughters, but it's rarely direct. There was, for the alternate history I wrote, which unfortunately is probably never going to come out because I got caught up in my previous agent's nervous breakdown and never was actually marketed. But It was set in the 1890s, mainly in Europe, mainly in Germany, and the underlying story was something I'd come across in a history book that I was being paid to work on for a publisher, set in Venice in the Renaissance. And it was about the court of the knight in Venice, which was sort of their vice court. And I guess there were a number of crimes you could be brought in for, but mainly it was men who were accused of sodomy. And there was a theoretical death penalty, but in practice, if you admitted who your partner was, you got to pay a fine and you got a slap on the wrist. Because all the upper class men in Venice were sleeping with each other like bunnies, they were all, so Leonardo da Vinci and all the Medicis and all ran through this court. And the money from the fines supported an order of nuns who were reformed prostitutes. And what happens is they have a Get Tough on Crime campaign. Say, we have to stop, giving these people a slap on the wrist. We have to start enforcing the real penalties. So of course everybody stops admitting who their partners are, because now they'll be executed for it. The fines dry up and the nuns starve to death. And I read that and I couldn't process it. It was like, I need to write about that. I don't know where, I don't know when. So it wound up as an underlying thing that's driving a story. The story was set, halfway across Europe, several hundred years later, but I knew I would need to write about that. So often it changes.
You need to travel to Venice to write about it.
Yeah, it would have been nice. I had that, a friend of mine got to do that.
You have to, because you're writing about places, houses, streets, canals, and...
Paul DeFilippo, friend of mine, great short story writer. It was a weird call. It basically was hired by a town in Italy to we want you to come over, we're going to treat you for a couple of weeks, and you need to write a story. You don't really care what it is or what it is, but to write something. They saw it as a way to promote the town.
No, there are plenty of stories in Venice.
Yeah. It wasn't Venice. It was I forget the name of the town. It was a beautiful town, built in the mountains and stuff. It was not a town you would have necessarily heard about if people weren't writing stories. But it was great.
If you want to be so lucky.
Yeah, that's nice. But you're always doing a million things as a writer, unless it's you have that lottery ticket and you get really lucky. Nobody's doing it for the money. It doesn't mean it's a second income. It's certainly a mortgage payment now and again, but you don't want to add up your hourly rate for writing books.
Right.
Like Dan Brown, I don't know if you know him.
Yeah.
He goes in so details. If he writes about Florence, you're been there. Barcelona is the last book is in Barcelona. It's you're really physically feel you're there. So he has to be there to write about everything. At least he gets information from.
Yeah, Guy Gavriel writes that way. Guy Gavriel writes that way. Someone I love, he'll go to a place and just kind of immerse himself in it for a year. And it's great if you have budget to do that. But
no, I just sound but sometimes they're going too deep. Like Ken Follett.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read about the Pillars of Earth.
Yeah.
So when they start building about the cathedral, that's flipping pages because to drop the rope, that the bricks would realign and with I don't care.
Well, you have to do a huge amount of world building, and it's very hard not to put all of it on the page. Really, the reader wants to know, I can lose myself in your world. But maybe 10% of it has actually go on the page. You don't want to put all of it.
Some readers like those details, some readers want just, a little bit more action.
I had a friend who once described a military thriller he was reviewing. He once described it as 2 issues of Guns and Ammo with dialogue. It's just all details and all,
They're good for Sarah. She's into details.
But I'm much more interested in, here's something I want to explore with these characters, and then what kind of world is going to let me explore that. Often I write fantasy because I want to explore something emotionally that I just can't do in our world. So to put it in a world where I can look at it. Because talking with my friend, it's dark enough as it is. I can't do it in our world without making it too dark. It's very hard to make that character sympathetic there. Here he is much more sympathetic.
So when are you going to go on opera?
That'd be nice.
He's waiting.
Yeah.
Waiting for the invite.
The movie,
Yeah.
or TV series, you know, something like that.
When I was writing the books on the Red Sox, those were the ones that got me on like every sports talk show in New
Oh,
England.
geez.
Oh, they were fun. But you've only got so many books in you, and there's so many other things I want to write about. It's like I did those, now I'm back to other things I really want to write.
Good, you have passion, that's good, and imagination.
Do your students help you, just with ideas?
Not with ideas so much, but they help a lot.
What you said.
Influence certain things, or?
People, ideas are the easy part. And people think, tend to think, and you get this a lot as a writer, like, you say, well, I have this great idea, I'll give you the idea and you write the book and we'll split the money. It's like, no, I already, and I think it was Alfred Bester said, if I never have another idea in my life, I'll still have more ideas than I have time to write books. What the students help with a lot is, it can take years between when you write something and when it comes out. It's really easy to burn out and feel like disconnected from it. So being around people who are just discovering it and love it, it's reminding me this is why I love science fiction. This is why I love fantasy. They're reading stuff, they're excited about it, and that excitement and that kind of love of writing and of what I'm doing is like, it keeps me very grounded and keeps me from burning out. So
Who
they
reads
help
it
a
as you
lot
go?
in that way. What?
Who reads it as you go?
I usually have some beta readers. There'll be people, often I'm looking for people for specific things. There's a few people, you want to have a few people that just love everything you write, because that's what helps keep you writing. And then there are other people I'll look for, are you good at catching this kind of thing? Is there a particular issue I want someone to catch up on, or like that I won't notice? I'm always, looking for experts in certain things, picking people's brains on certain things. There's a novella that I wrote it, I'm not happy with it yet, so I'm kind of leaving it for a few months and I'm going to come back to it. I think there's a sag in the middle of it somewhere. But it's a sort of an homage to Ian Fleming's James Bond stories, if Bond was a woman on the autism spectrum. And I like the character a lot. I did but I was also running things past people I know who are like experts on autism or who worked with a lot of, people in different areas, areas of autism, just to make sure, am I getting this right?
Yeah.
So it's like a different, different set of people for different, but there's some people who just, okay, this is someone who loves my writing or whose advice I really value. And there are a few people like that who I go to a lot. And then it's different for other things. There are people I ask questions on the autism thing that I'll probably never talk to about different books. So. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.